Okay, hello YouTube. So this is going to be my video about the problem that Kant is trying to solve that leads him to his system, right? Leads him to the conclusions that he gets to. Because the problem is just as important as the solution, I think. And it's just as important to understand it. And normally these kinds of things begin with a biographical sketch of the person. I'm not going to do that, not the least reason because Kant, his life is tremendously boring. One fact that I think is interesting is that Kant was about 5'2", and he had a very large head, and he was sort of twisted physically. So I imagine him to look almost like Tyrion Lannister, but not the Peter Dinklage kind of handsome Tyrion Lannister, but like the George R.R. Martin, like gnarled and twisted Tyrion Lannister. But I just like imagining him sort of bopping along. In my head, Kant looks like a troll doll, but I have seen paintings of him, and he doesn't look like a troll doll. Another interesting fact about his life is that there is a note somewhere in Kant's like journals or his letters or something, where he like briefly mentions a book that he read, and he's like, "This book was so bad I didn't even bother to memorize it." The implication being that Kant made a regular practice of memorizing every book he read. Right? So this is the kind of man that we're dealing with. Kant was a genius, and he was very scientific. He was very much a scientist. He taught science for a living. That was what he did. Also, the first that I'm aware of, at least, really the first philosopher to be a professor, though he wasn't a professor of philosophy. So Kant begins the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, by talking about Hume. He talks about reading Hume, and he talks about reading it and how it snapped him out of his dogmatic slumber, right? Very poetic language. But he realized that there was this problem with Hume's work, and Hume recognizes it, but I think Kant realizes that it's a much bigger problem than Hume gives it credit for. So Kant is responding to Hume. He apparently, legend has it, Kant spent, I think, 17 years meditating on this problem, until he finally arrived at his solution and pumped out the first edition of the Critique of Pure Reason really quickly. Didn't really write much in that time. Just like sat and thought about his. Oh, no, everything is going to fall apart if I don't solve this problem. So let's talk about the problem. Kant agrees with Hume, and I'm not going to explicate Hume's philosophy, but please read Hume. It's very easy to read, especially if you're an English speaker, because Hume was writing, he was a Scottish person, so he was writing in English in his first language, which makes it incredibly easy to read in comparison to someone like Kant. Also, Kant sort of invents an entire lexicon of technical terms that make it very difficult. Aside from that, so Kant agrees with Hume's empiricism, sort of, right? What Hume realized is that all knowledge comes from experience, right? And there are certain statements that we can make independent of experience. This is what the word a priori means, before or without experience, right? So there are certain claims that we can make a priori. And these claims are, in Kantese, these claims are called analytic claims, right? They're tautological claims. They're tautologies. Something like the ball is round is an analytic statement that I can make a priori, right? I can analyze the idea of ball and come to the conclusion that round is contained within the idea of ball. So I don't need to run an experiment to see that. It's true by definition. This is an analytic judgment, right? It comes from an analysis of a concept that I can make a priori. That is, I can make it independent of experience. I don't need to run an experiment to find it out. Then there are other kinds of statements, which are called synthetic judgments, right? Synthetic judgments involve taking two things that are not contained in each other and putting them together, right? So let's take the ball is pink. Nothing about the concept of ball necessarily implies pink. Nothing about the concept of pink necessarily implies ball, right? Now, Hume's diagnosis is the only way that I can confirm that the ball is pink, is by looking at the ball, right? I need some kind of experience of the ball to affirm that. So it has to be what's called a posteriori, right? A priori means independent of experience. A posteriori means with experience, basically. And analytic means you look at the concept, you figure out what's in the concept, and it's an analytic judgment is necessarily true. A triangle has three sides, for instance. It's an analytic judgment. A synthetic judgment, again, the ball is pink. I have to look at the ball to know if the ball is pink. So, why is this a problem? Or Hume recognizes a problem here. Hume recognizes the problem of causality, right? What he notices is that, well, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. A posteriori judgment, since we can only know by experience, we cannot come to the conclusion that they are absolute, that they are absolutely true, right? We just can't do that. There's what's thought of in terms of, sometimes it's called the black swan problem. Biologists for years and years and years thought that all swans were white because all they ever encountered was a white swan. Then they encountered a black swan and they went, holy shit, everything we know about swans is wrong. So this is the risk that you run into with a priori judgments. You can't make claims that they're necessarily true in all places, all times, and all situations. Because no person, no experience can be in all places, all times, and all situations, right? So you can't derive absolutes from a posteriori knowledge. You cannot derive absolutes, therefore, for Hume, from synthetic judgments, or what he calls inductive reason. This is called the problem of induction, right? So, Hume realizes that this is a problem in terms of causality, right? If you see a cue ball go forward, and it hits an 8 ball and it goes somewhere else, we say that the cue ball caused the 8 ball to move, right? But we don't actually observe the cue ball causing the 8 ball to do anything. We observe the cue ball moving and hitting the 8 ball, and then we observe the 8 ball moving, right? So what Hume says is you never observe a cause and effect relationship. The only way that we can come to know that the cue ball causes the 8 ball to move is by witnessing it a certain amount of times, and then we eventually realize that regularly the 8 ball moves when the cue ball hits it, and we can say that the cue ball then therefore causes the 8 ball to move, right? So it's just sort of a habit. That's what causality ends up being. It's just something that we arrive at by experience. Kant sees this as a big problem, because this means that causality is not necessary. It is not absolute, right? If causality is not absolute, the sciences don't make sense. You cannot look at natural causes and come to some conclusion about the effects, and you cannot do vice versa, right? You cannot come to any reliable understanding of the world if causality is not absolute. This is Kant's reading of the problem. But Kant takes it a little further. What about the statement 3 plus 5 equals 8? Right? Well, how do we arrive at that state? Well, there's nothing in 3 that implies 8, and there's nothing in 5 that implies 8. So how do we get to that statement? Well, we get to that statement by counting things. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and counting together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So we get to them a posteriori. We get to them, it's a synthetic judgment that 3 plus 5 equals 8 for Kant. If that's the case, that means that mathematics is not absolute. Right? Mathematics is threatened by David Hume's philosophy. Science is threatened by David Hume's philosophy, and religion is threatened by David Hume's philosophy for obvious reasons. Because if everything comes from experience, how do you get to God through experience? I think Hume eventually comes to the conclusion that God exists, but really, really, really hesitantly, and a lot of people cite him as an atheist, which he might well have been. He might have just said that he believed, or put a defense of God in for, so he wasn't condemned or he wasn't banned or something. But so this is Kant's problem. He agrees with everything that Hume says, and then realizes that if everything that Hume says is true, then it follows that science doesn't work. And then it follows that mathematics doesn't work. And then it follows that religion doesn't work. And all three of these are humongous problems for Kant. So, how does Kant deal with this problem? Gold star, if you can guess it. Because he develops his whole system from this realization that he has this. What the hell am I saying? That he has. He develops his whole system out of this. On meditating on this problem. So yeah, comment, subscribe, and I'm looking forward to, my guess is that a user named Socrates, I think it's 856, is sitting there going, oh my god, you've misread this so badly, and you're explicating it so fucking badly, let me type all this stuff. I'm waiting for that list of comments from you, Socrates. But I think that's the fairest and most succinct way that I can state Kant's reading of the problem of causality, or the problem of induction, as it's typically called, to put it in Hume's parlance. And have a good day.